So, welcome to Text World. This here is what the majority of Frog Fractions 2 is going to be like. This ASCII-based, Atari-esque, Metroidvania-ish adventure game. So let's get right into things. Our main goal will be collecting these various sigils throughout the game. We'll see what they're used for eventually. For now, let's continue to explore this dark cavern that we've started in. If this brings to mind the old Atari game Adventure by any chance, a great game by the way, if you like really old retro stuff, Atari style games, I recommend checking that one out. It's a lot of fun. If it brings to mind that game, that's probably intentional. There's actually an item later that is pretty much a direct reference to that game, although we won't be seeing that for quite some time. These here are gems. We can pick them up and gain score for doing so. We don't actually want to do that though. We want to avoid most of the gems for a reason you'll be seeing in a bit. For now though, let's continue exploring. I mentioned the word Metroidvania, and the world in this game is pretty open. Although a lot of areas are closed off at the start, you need to find the necessary items in order to explore further. Here is a warp gate leading to further on, but we can't actually access that area. We need to come from the other side in order to open up that as an effective shortcut. Same with this one here. So for now, let's continue exploring. This person won't let us pass without a sword, but they're not actually all that effective at guarding. We can just waltz right around them. That said, we won't be heading down that path just yet. Let's explore a few of the other ones first. Here we can customize our character to make them any color imaginable. Let's go with a nice cappuccino that looks calm and soothing. And then let's enter into the menu again and scroll all the way down to encounter a rather more interesting menu option. You can't actually see this on the recording due to how I'm recording it, but accessing that option actually brings up a browser menu, Windows Explorer for me, looking for a Mass Effect 2 save, which handily enough is something I do actually have. I downloaded one when I actually came across this prompt when I did my first playthrough. Loading that up, it actually greets us according to the name of the shepherd on that save file, and it affects one other thing later on, as we'll be seeing. Here's a little bit of a timing puzzle. We need to make our way across these flashing gates without getting struck by them, otherwise we'll return to the start of the screen. This little segment looks a little bit tricky, but as long as you get a good running start and just hold up and right, you'll speed through it without much issue. Letting us collect this root symbol. Unfortunately, we cannot progress any further here as our way is blocked by dire shrubs. So rather than trying to make our way back through that timing puzzle, which I'm pretty sure is impossible, let's just punch ourselves to death. There we go. Restarts us at the start of the screen, but with the items still collected. That ability comes in handy in a few situations like that. So let's see what's in this house over here. Another door that we can't enter into. It's a good idea, by the way, to keep in mind the various color-coded doors for when we actually come across the keys that open them. And if you actually play with your imagination a little bit, you can realize, oh, I can actually go behind the door here, even though that doesn't actually make much sense in terms of real-world logic. So I've been ignoring these, and that's because, well, for the most part they're rather useless. They are basically Dark Souls-style messages, and despite what you might initially think, they're not just auto-generated by the game. They're actually left by other players, and when you first start the game, it'll actually pull messages left by other players from a random pool. So there is actually a reason to write messages with that orange soapstone that we picked up. Not that I'm gonna bother with it. I don't bother with doing that in the actual Dark Souls games, so I'm not gonna try here. Here we have metal shrubs, which are also blocking our way, so we have no choice but to go through this twisted cistern here. So let's see how far we can get. And this right here is why we actually don't want to be picking up gems. When you reach the gem limit, you can no longer pick up gems and they become impassable walls, barring your progress. It might be possible to make it through this maze if you pick up as few gems as possible through it, but I'm pretty sure it's not actually possible to do that. We'll have ways to deal with getting around gems later. For now, we'll just have to backtrack and try another one of the paths. It's fortunate for us that this guy is a very ineffective guard, otherwise we'd be stumped. So here we come across a path that is apparently impassable, but it's the only path open to us, so clearly there must be a way. And that is by pushing these crates into the water, thus creating an effective path for us. And if we push some more crates out of the way, we can access this item here, which is a pair of autocorrect skates. What these do is make it so that as long as you're holding in a movement direction, you will continue to move, as long as there is a way forward that you can actually progress. So just by holding the right arrow, I'm speeding along the screen. It comes in pretty handy if you just want to go through a screen very quickly, but it can be a bit of a pain in the ass because it doesn't always move in the direction that you want it to. So if you're trying to move precisely through an area filled with traps, for example, it may end up biting you in the ass. Unfortunately, if it does turn out to be more of a hindrance than a help, we can't actually take it off just yet, as we need the white key in order to take off the skates, so we'll just have to deal with its foibles for now. And now we're in the Gorilla Grove and have to deal with these purple gorillas here. For the most part, they just wander around, but if you get close to them, they will bum rush over to you, so you have to be fairly agile if you want to avoid them, which I was not just there. Let me wait for the gorillas to move and then I can access this item over here, which unlocks gamepad support. I've not actually tested it out to see if I can actually now use the gamepad, and if previously it was impossible in this portion of the game, but Jim Crawford, the man behind this game, strikes me as the kind of guy who would totally make it like that. So here we have a well, which into we can throw gems. This is the one way you have of removing gems from your gem counter. You also get a variety of completely worthless tips for doing so. So let's remove a few gems from our counter just in case we come across any gems that we have to collect. Of course, getting past the gorillas can be pretty tricky, especially if you don't want to go around the long way. But if you're agile, you can do it. Thankfully, if we enter into this little puzzle area here, the gorillas will leave us alone. They don't like magic and so won't enter into the wizard's hut. So here we have a variety of puzzle elements that we'll be seeing throughout this portion of the game. So it's good to learn what they do. These double-edged arrows, the two-way sliders, can only move in the directions that are indicated by the arrows with which they're pointing. So these ones here can be moved up and down, and these ones here can be moved side to side. These green triangles will always move in the direction that they're pointing if there is nothing impeding them. So if I move this two-way slider out of the way, it will rock it all the way down to the bottom. And if I move this one over here, it will solve the puzzle handily. It's pretty much just a gimme just to give you a tutorial on how these sliders work. There will be a few more in-depth puzzles on them in the future. But for solving that, we pick up the red key, so let's return to that red door and see if we can't make some progress. Our way here is unfortunately blocked by even more shrubs, this time of the regular variety. This here is a situation where the autocorrect skates come in very handy. I can just tap in a direction and scoot through. I don't have to constantly bash into walls. So our goal here is twofold. We want to access that door in the middle, but we also want to collect that symbol over there on the left that has a path of water leading to it. So using what knowledge we've previously learned, we know we can push these crates into it to create an effective path. This puzzle here looks like it might actually be pretty complex at first, but if you actually take a good long look at it, it's actually really simple. I'm not blaming though if you get stumped on it. I am personally very poor at these block pushing puzzles, and it actually took me a while to figure this out. And I felt quite embarrassed when I realized it was actually very simple to do so. You can get 4 immediately by doing what I just did, and then the remaining 2 are easy enough as well. Just be careful about where you push the arrows. You don't want to push them into a wall where they can no longer be pushed from. Otherwise you can end up fricking it and ruining the solution. That said, if you do end up making an unwinnable scenario, you can just leave the screen and come back, and the puzzle, except for the blocks that you pushed into the water, will be reset completely. Oh, speaking of fricking it, I might have just done that by pushing that arrow once more than I should have. Let's see if I can solve it. Okay, good. As I said, it is a very lenient and forgiving puzzle. Alright, so let's see what's through this door here. Well, it's Flappy Toaster. You know that one very popular mobile game app. You've heard of it, I'm sure. So let's just soak in the wonderful atmosphere being presented to us for now. So naturally, if we do nothing, the toaster ends up crashing onto the first set of pipes and ends up spewing its load all over the ground, which is something that would rather be avoided, so let's try again. As you probably realize by now, this is basically a combination of Flappy Bird and Cookie Clicker. We want to start by adding fuel, and then when we have enough temperature, purchase some kindling to increase our temperature gains even more, and repeat that with the successive levels of fuel. However, we don't want to just keep these in our possession, because that will end up causing the temperature to raise so high that the toaster will become unstable and difficult to control. So when we've actually achieved enough height to actually clear through a gap, we'll actually want to sell off all our materials in order to level the toaster off. Like so. It also gains a tiny bit of height from selling things as well, so if you need an immediate jump to make a gap, you can sell items as well. Fortunately, the second set of pipes is positioned perfectly to allow us to pass through, no issues. As is the third. These are somewhat randomly placed, so I'm actually just getting really lucky here. Normally they're more spaced out, so you actually have to purchase and sell more fuel to actually make it through them, like I'm gonna have to do here. Here I just need to buy a few things to lose some height, and then I can sell them off once I'm past the gap. Like so, and this leaves us perfectly positioned to collect the item that we're doing this minigame for. We're not entirely sure what it is, but it's in the game and we can collect it, so surely it's useful. Now of course we have to figure out how to leave this hellish hellscape. Is that rather redundant? It might be. Which is easy enough. You simply have to crash near one of these cracks in the ground, and you'll crash right through and return with the thing. As for what that thing is, it's a sword. Now we can deal with those gorillas that have been hounding us so, as well as shrubs. Now, a few pathways have opened up to us, so let's explore a few of them. Again, with the whole Metroidvania elements that this game has, you can head down any of the paths that has clearly been blocked by shrubs or enemies. But knowing where to go, I'll head down this one first, since it's the most convenient. as we're going to want to pick up this Mega Sword over here. Now, it's blocked by a door, which requires mastering using it. That's a reference to one of the things the old men say in the original Legend of Zelda, if you don't recognize it. But all it means here is that we need to kill all of the gorillas on the screen. And now we have the Mega Sword. This will be useful for cutting down those dire shrubs. They're resistant to the regular sword, but fall easily to the Mega Sword. And in case we come across any more gems, let's deposit a few more in the well over here. Probably not a bad idea to take out the gorillas first though, since they're sure to bother us. Thankfully they're happy enough to run straight into the sword, making the bloody work of killing all the easier. Oh dear. Well, we should avoid Todd's toothpaste then if that ever comes up. And here the game pulls a jape on you. If you put enough gems into the well, it overflows, spilling gems out all over the place and filling up your gem counter. The well isn't an effective way of removing gems from your counter despite its initial appearance. But that's fine, we'll have other ways of dealing with gems in the future. For now, let's head back to the path that was guarded by the vile dire shrubs. Now this guy is happy enough to let us pass, but thanks for that earlier convenience, we're gonna murder him. There is no greater joy than that of killing a fellow sapient being, after all. That's what video games have taught me. And we can just skip this puzzle entirely now that we have the sword. So one thing about the sword that I haven't mentioned just yet is that it actually actively counts as part of your character's model as far as collision with walls is concerned. So if I have the sword straight out in front of me like this, and then try and move over to the left wall, it will fail. I move downward because of the autocorrect skates, that's the only direction it can move in at that point. So what that means is that when you're in narrow spaces, the sword can actually be something of an impediment, making it difficult to move through them. And some paths are actually entirely unavailable to us while we're carrying the sword. That said, it's still generally worth carrying around because it's more useful than it is a hindrance, but it's something to keep in mind. Now we have some fuel for our sword, and it shows off its true capabilities. With this, we need not fear any enemies. Unfortunately, it consumes that fuel so quickly that it doesn't actually turn out to be all that useful, which is probably for the best. With it spinning about the place like that, it would be difficult to traverse in tight corridors. But we're just gonna move this crate down here so we can deal with this wall of light. And actually make our way forward to another door. What awaits us this time? It's Biker Chicks from Saturn. The name of the game is actually Biker Chicks, although I added the from Saturn part myself. Good old 90s, early aughts nostalgia. So what player shall we select? Clucker, Whizball, Bumper, Jumper, or Leaper? All of these other characters are available by beating the game with the characters we currently have unlocked. Let's start with the default, Clucker. His blood type is A, and Clucker queues up 5 moves per timeout and then executes them all in a row. So basically this game is a multiplayer, turn-based version of the classic game Snake. You input 5 movements per turn and then execute them. And essentially the goal is to survive for as long as possible. If you touch a wall or any eggs left by you or the other players, you will die, so you want to avoid that. Thankfully, it's rather easy to win, as you're playing against the CPU, which is completely brain dead. They are very good at locking themselves into an unwinnable situation, and even when they do have room to freely move about, oftentimes they'll just end up running into a wall anyway, as that last one did there. So for winning, we unlocked a new character, Murdery. Let's see what they're like. Murdery's blood type is A+, so clearly he is superior to Clucker. Murdery can murder other chicks just by walking next to them. Ooh, handy. So now if we're in tight spaces with another chick, we could actually exit pretty safely. The playing field changes each time you play. It selects it from a few of them. Since the other chicks are moving towards the center and downward section, let's head up so we have more room to move about. And again, just rely on the incredibly stupid AI to win the day for us. See, it's simple enough. Oh wait, the last one's not dead, I thought it was. Hold on, this shouldn't take too much longer. See? Now we have density. So density's blood type is A again. Once per game, density can press the action button to make all eggs fall to the bottom of the play field. Honestly, that seems like it would be more of a help to the stupid AI than it would be to us. So let's try Whizzball instead, whose blood type is B. Whizzball shoots a fireball forward with the action button. So some of the characters in this game actually have active abilities that you can perform by pressing space. Let's try one of them out. Here you shoot a fireball 3 tiles forward. You have to kind of predict where the other players are going to move if you want it to be any use, but again it's useful for killing players in tight corridors. But ultimately we don't really get a chance to use it. Again, the brain dead AI of this game is really dumb. And for winning 3 rounds, we actually get the thing at last. And one other change besides. Look over on the right side of the screen where our inventory and stats are. You notice anything different? Anything new? Yeah, it turns out we're a snake person now. Well, we're just gonna have to deal with that. So, much like the classic game Snake, we have to avoid running into ourselves, otherwise we will die. Thankfully, like dying previously, it will just restart us at the beginning of the screen. However, things get trickier as we consume objects. The more things we consume, the greater our length becomes. And unfortunately, autocorrect is still active in this form, and here is a case where it ends up being a huge hindrance. I'm just trying to move through these dire shrubs here, and it causes me to move in the direction that I don't want to move in, thus dying by locking myself in. So you think it might be worth avoiding as many objects as possible, so you're as short as possible and can move through the areas as easily as possible. But you do actually want to eat as many things as possible. How many times did I just say possible in the last 10 seconds? Because we will actually need to be a certain length at a certain point. Oh yeah, don't think you can stop us. We're a many-person train of destruction. So for now, let's just continue on where we can actually move. You notice that the areas have altered themselves a fair bit, sealing off a few paths. And we also don't have any of our previous inventory, so we can't move through the doors that we previously could open. It's basically just a linear path leading us to where we want to go. Which is this blimp here. And here is where we get our companion back. I told you she'd be a steadfast companion throughout the game, so get used to her. She also is incredibly fond of puns, so get used to that as well, if you're not a pun-loving person. Ah, now the place is really lit up. Wait, no, that's not a pun, shit. Okay, ignore that, let's just move on. Here is probably the most difficult sequence as the snake person. Because of the autocorrect, it can be difficult to move along the path that you actually want to, so you have to make your taps very carefully. Especially since the inputs during this segment are very sensitive. If you tap the arrow keys for more than a fraction of a second, you actually move multiple spaces. So you have to be a bit careful. But now we're in the home clear, heading for the third and final door of the day. What awaits us this time? Newsflash. Politician Filippo Argenti has been kidnapped from the Fifth Circle. Your task is to track the kidnapper from the Fifth Circle to his hideout and arrest him. In the Fifth Circle, the wrathful fight on the surface of the Styx, and the sullen gurgle underneath. So, if you're at all versed in literature, you surely recognize what's going on now. We're playing as a detective hunting after a kidnapper and his victim in hell. And not just any hell, but the depiction of hell done by Dante Alighieri in his Divine Comedy, which is basically the biggest piece of Christian fanfiction that's out there. So let's get to investigating. Alright, so we've gleaned 2 bits of information from this informant. It's a man, and his eyes were the color of hazelnuts, so let's input that into our log. By doing that, we can narrow down our possible suspect list, and immediately we're down to 3. That's pretty good. In addition to information about the kidnapper, we can also get information as to where they're headed. This informant says that they saw him board a plane with a 3-headed worm on it. So where in hell would that description match? I'm actually not entirely sure. I'm thinking the 3-headed part specifically might be a reference to Cerberus. I forget what circle of hell he is in though. I've never read the Divine Comedy in its entirety, nor even just the Inferno part, the part that people actually like to read. So I'm not super familiar with what is in which circle. I want to say it's an earlier on one though. Hey, I got it in 1, so let's see if my assumption that it was referring to this circle is correct. It was. Basically, if you happen to be a scholar of the Inferno or the Divine Comedy, you'll find this part of the game pretty easy. So he wanted to open a wind farm, so clearly he would have headed somewhere where there's a lot of wind. And his favorite author apparently sounded like a huge misanthrope. Unfortunately, that's a bit more difficult to pin. My immediate guess would be to go to Friedrich Nietzsche, but I'm not too terribly familiar with any of these other writers, so I'm not sure if they'd be counted as misanthropes or not. So let's just keep that little bit of knowledge in the back of our heads. We don't want to accidentally narrow it down to the wrong person after all by making a guess. So they wanted to go somewhere where it was windy, so that would be the Circle of the Lustful, which I believe is the second. Indeed, in the second circle, the lustful are blown violently back and forth by strong winds. His hair was mostly reflected light in a specular fashion. To me, that would suggest that they have a lighter hair color, although again, that's a guess, so let's leave off actually inputting that for now. He wanted to meet the cursed wolf Plutus. That is something that I actually have no idea about where this cursed wolf would be. So now we're just gonna have to check each circle in succession until we can find out where they headed. In the 4th circle, the hoarders and the spendthrift are pitted against one another in eternal combat. Ah, this seems to be the correct place since we're actually getting information. Apparently he was reading a guide called Best Flaming Tombs. I know that refers to a specific punishment as described by Dante in one of the circles, but again I'm not sure which one, so I'll probably just go through them in order. And another informant saw him tumbling down the street. Can that tell us anything about the subject? They might be a fan of stealing, or acrobatics, but again I'm not entirely sure, so let's leave off from doing that for now. Actually, you know what, let's input our guesses and see what happens. Worst case scenario, and we can always reject them. So blonde, favorite author would be Nietzsche, and the hobby would be acrobatics. Unfortunately, that gives us 0 matches, so clearly we've made a mistake somewhere. So let's try changing the hobby. That also gives us 0 matches. Rather than inputting them all at once, let's input our guesses one at a time to narrow it down one by one, as it were. Alright, just with the author alone, we've identified the suspect as corn turntablist Clay Clapham. So assuming our guess is correct, we have our warrant. But let's input our other guesses and see if it matches. So it matches as blonde. That's a pretty good match. I'm fairly comfortable with that. So before we head to whatever circle has the flaming tombs, let's view our almanac. If you're having trouble and really don't know anything about Dante's Inferno, it gives you the entire text of it here. I'm not sure which translation of it is though. Hopefully they picked a good one. But if you actually take the time to scroll all the way down to the bottom, you find out that it's actually a terms of service agreement. I guess it's part of Hell's requisite reading if you're going to head there. And for completing it, we can begin Inferno New Game Plus. I don't actually know if there's anything different about the text at this point. It might be a different translation or something, I'm not sure. I'm not actually going to take the time to check for myself though. Alright, so let's see if we can head to where the flaming tombs are. In the 6th circle, heretics burn in flaming tombs. You've tracked down the suspect and quickly arrest him. It's corn producer Bob Boffo. Unfortunately, your warrant is for corn turntablist Clay Clapham, and you're forced to release him. Better luck next time. But we get our reward either way.